There's been a power shift in Israel. A new Israeli prime minister has been sworn in. It is Naftali Bennett, a former top advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who broke off to form his own political party, which is very small, but put together a coalition with some left-leaning leaders, and including, again, Yair Lapid, who is supposed to do this power-sharing government where Naftali Bennett is the prime minister for 2 years, and then Lapid for the next 2 years. So they actually were sworn in as the 13th and 14th prime minister. Problem is, for Netanyahu is not just stepping away from politics, has not made the decision to do that. He believes so far that this coalition is so weak, and we'll point out some of the weaknesses there. Not to wish them any again not success. But the idea is that you have a coalition of the right, a small group of right-wing leaders, the left, and kind of more moderate parties, and for the first time ever, the United Arab parties. If one of the 120 members of the Knesset, just one, switches sides back to Netanyahu's coalition, which they can do, there's a power shift. Again, things change. That coalition would crumble. I do want to point out the difference between kind of our system and their system. And Andy, when you see a government that is, again, it's 60-59, it's kind of similar to our U.S. Senate, but this would determine, unlike the U.S. Senate would make up the Senate, this would determine the makeup of who is in charge. And so there are a lot of people casting doubt on whether or not, for the second time in a row, a opposition leader who joins a coalition that really isn't a coalition that agrees on anything will never actually get their time to be prime minister. A lot of people, it's kind of like a joke to think that there's going to go full 4 years in Israel without another election.
Oh, I think you're absolutely correct. This is the very most fragile of coalitions. And this is the problem with a parliamentary democracy in which you have multiple political parties, each of which is trying to join with another to come up with a government or not, as the case may be. And as you say, you lose one member in the Knesset and you've lost your government, and your government has to reform. Naftali Bennett is, for the moment, prime minister. But you know, Jordan, that could change in a day. It could change in 2 days, in a week, in a month. It may not last very long. He was with Netanyahu. He is from Haifa. His parents are migrants from the United States to Israel who came, and he was born after the formation of the State of Israel in 1948. So he's not necessarily a new face in Israeli politics. He's been around for a long time. But again, Prime Minister Netanyahu is by no means out of the scene. He is in the wings. He is not retired from politics. He has not announced that. And he may very well be prime minister yet again in a very short time, or someone else may be altogether. Very fragile in Israel right now.
It's interesting. Former Prime Minister Netanyahu, this is only within the last couple of days since we've been talking to him on Friday. He claimed in his speech before the changeover and the new prime minister took charge that the Biden administration had asked him, and this was kind of unusual to see, a prime minister of Israel at the time. He had not yet stepped down and passed the torch, and he's not stepping down as leader of the opposition right now. So he believes that he can use his political know-how and knowledge to pick apart at this coalition very quickly. And see himself returned back to the prime minister post. But he said that the Biden administration had asked him to keep their disagreements on Iran in private. Now, again, this idea that the somehow Thann, that it's just interesting to see how the U.S., I'm sure that we say that all the time, let's not put our disagreements out in the open. But Prime Minister Netanyahu Thann thought it was important to let his own people know, speaking in Hebrew, so it wasn't just an international audience he was talking to, but to his own people, about how this new administration was treating the Israeli government.
Well, I think it shows you just how fervently he believes it. And the hope would be that the new administration there in Israel would see it the same way. Look, I mean, I think for me on this side of the water, Jordan, and being more familiar with American politics, the interesting thing to me is what might cause this coalition to pivot back towards Netanyahu. And to me, Jordan, the most likely thing would actually be relationships with the United States and this issue of Iran. I mean, I think that's probably why Prime Minister Netanyahu was so forward in his outgoing address, was saying, look, I know the U.S. administration would like me to be silent, but this is the threat that our people face, and I'm not going to be silent about it. Jordan, I would hope his successor would see things the same way, but ultimately I think the new coalition government, there's going to be different factions in them. I think Bennett is probably more likely to be of a similar mold than Netanyahu, but again, it's a very fragmented coalition. Will they be able to come together and have a unified posture on that issue? I don't know the answer to that, Jordan, but I do think the answer is going to be the most significant determining factor on whether or not they're able to keep that coalition together.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about this coalition is that Naftali Bennett is actually more right-wing. And we talked about this last week, but he's more right-wing on paper, policy-wise, even than Netanyahu, who is considered a right-wing in Israel and considered right-wing by the world, certainly. But he's partnered within his coalition are people who do not share those views at all. So the question is, how do you govern?